Data, my favorite topic, and with two of my absolute favorite people, Stephany Lapierre and Tim Herrod, and we're going to get into it with each of them and really get into all things data. And we might geek out a little bit, so look for that. So,
need a clicker.
Oh no, we need a clicker.
We forgot the clicker.
We have a clicker?
But Steph is the founder of TealBook, and Tim is the CPO at Albemarle. I'm going to say it, Tim.
Is my mic on?
Yeah.
It is? Albemarle.
Yeah, Albemarle.
Yeah.
I get it wrong every time. I'm an American, so we botch everything. So while we're waiting for the clicker, let me start with a little audience interaction. How many of you think supplier data is important? Yeah, everybody. I hope everybody thinks that. How many of you have good, clean supplier data, fully vetted records and enriched? Nobody, yeah. That matches my experience. And having just written a book about how to do a digital transformation, the thing that I see everywhere is a lack of good supplier data. So my question is why? What are we doing wrong? And that's kind of the premise for this session. So Steph, let me ask you, why did you build TealBook? With that as the background.
And we only have 25 minutes, so
yes.
But I built a procurement consulting firm about 16 years ago. I worked with large companies who had implemented large ERP, source-to-pay, etc. I had pretty sophisticated strategic sourcing function, and also built procurement function and scale-ups who had no procurement function. And as soon as in those companies where you were building something that you want to be enabling, transparent, scalable, as soon as you started to introduce software, you need to take the data out of your financial system if you could get it fast enough, clean it, update it into your new software, and then invite suppliers to come to a portal. And it works when there's one systems, maybe, but then still getting the suppliers to come to the portal was quite a challenge. And then as soon as you start introducing software for sourcing, contract, compliance, and you start to create a lot of disparity. And what I saw at the time is like, this is not a people problem because people want to drive change and drive value for the organization. It's not a process problem because we're actually over-processing everything. And it's not a software problem because there's a lot of software. I just saw this as a data problem. And the problem was that there's data everywhere, but there's no way for procurement to access the information that they needed to drive change, influence the business, and drive better strategy. And so I became really passionate about solving this data problem.
Okay, so there's two things I want to, well, one is why do you see that procurement still does not have good data? And I'm going to tease that there's a second part of that question, but why does procurement still not have that data, good data?
Well, you need data across every single function. And when you think about the amount of investment that goes into, getting a supplier, like to discover, to source, to due diligence, to contract, and across the entire life cycle, we've implemented a lot of processes and software that allows those functional teams to drive some of the information to drive their own objective, but if that data doesn't translate back to the organization to build institutional knowledge, they're not really thinking about the performance of the organization as a whole. And so I think that the disparity of how we've built this ecosystem, and I'll just push here, we found one slide. We don't have it, but there's a slide that Elouise had presented 4 years ago, right, at ISM, and I sat in the front row of her presentation. And the slide is amazing. I'm sorry we don't have it, but it's each software, it had a little data stack underneath, and that was today. So this 4 years ago. And then you migrated to have a data lake with different systems to a fully operating system with multiple applications. And it really portrayed to me what was happening, is there's so much disparity in the information that we're collecting. And if you're depending, again, on suppliers to come to a portal, I will guarantee you they won't come. They will come, a few hundred will come maybe one time, but the motivation to have to update the information in a portal at the speed and scale of things happening with the information that is external and provides context to that supplier is incredibly difficult. And I think we've all suffered from that.
Well, and that was the second part of my question was the portal, because anybody that follows me knows that I'm all about supplier experience management, which means blowing up the portal and doing something different, because if you're going to get the comprehensive supplier record that the supplier updates regularly and is engaged in collaborative with you, you have to do experience management to get that data, not a portal. And yeah.
Yeah, and even with the best experience, the best intention, like when we started TealBook initially was a profile where we'd invite suppliers to come to one profile that would get distributed to all system or all customers. In theory, it seems like a good idea, but the supplier is still not going to come to the portal. That's what we've experienced. And the big transformation for us is looking at, and this is an example of an architecture of one of our customers. I'm sure it's not so dissimilar to what's, probably you're experiencing in your organization, in multiple systems, a lot of disparity, a lot of software that suppliers have to come to update. And this is one customer. And don't try to read this slide. This is really ugly on purpose. But what we're moving, and when I'm seeing the world, is what's amplified is what you've created.
Yeah. Yes. So, well, this is this was actually mid-pandemic, and this slide has changed. This is not the current version. And actually, there's going to be a new version coming out that exploded. But this gives you an idea of how much it's changing over time. But TealBook was actually the first one to make it to the center of the data foundation. And actually, as critical as I am of others, I actually am very receptive to feedback. And Steph and I had quite a number of heated debates over the phone during the pandemic, trying to explain to each other what we were trying to say, because I was saying we need this hub, platform, data exchange, and she's saying, well, that's what I built. And I'm like, what do you mean you built it? And so we finally got aligned, and TealBook was the first. Now there are others now, if you look at the more current versions, and there's actually going to be more segmentation even within the data foundation, but from a supplier data platform, absolutely, TealBook was the first, and it was through this friction between us on many Sunday afternoons. Because what else were we doing during the pandemic?
Well, I think the point to me of this slide is just the amplification. When you're walking around and you're seeing so many really innovative startups, a lot of them are automating, getting workflow and processes to be, accelerated, which you need. There's a lot of different requirements across multiple functions, across the entire life cycle of procurement that are required. But if you don't have a strong data foundation, then you're relying on workflow and processes. If you're thinking data first, and you're enabling the data to be pushed into those functional teams through workflow processes, software, you're completely building a different infrastructure that can be completely transformational, because now you're driven by insight, and you can actually have an interchangeable, flexible, agile technology ecosystem. You're not stuck with the one suite solution that took you 5 years to implement and drive change, because the technology will keep changing. So the ability to have that plug-and-play experience with best of breed that meets your requirement is so critical.
Before we go on, I want to just add one point. It's the supplier record that threads all those apps together. That's what gets missed, and that's what I try to explain, is no matter how many apps you have, the common thread is the supplier. And that's a dramatic change from the past, where the spend transaction was the threading, organizing principle. That's the old way. The new way is exactly Steph described, but it's the supplier record threads it all, because that's what's common amongst all those apps.
That's right. And when I look, I think Hackett Group came with the 9 things that a CPO needs to care about. And I call Chris Stashuk, I'm like, where's data? Because you got savings, you got ESG, you've got risk compliance, you got all these things that are enabled with better data. And so, even when you think, if someone told me yesterday, oh, we've got analytics, I'm going to challenge you that your analytics are as good as they could be if you had better data, because if your data is subpar underneath, your analytics will tell you a story, but it won't tell you the full story. If you could connect all your system to data cloud, where we're seeing a lot of that investment being today, the biggest challenge is well, how do you connect poor data to each other to get the insight that you need to drive change? You're going to be very limited to the amount of data that you have, which is probably not a lot. and you're not going to have that external perspective. And it's the things that you don't know that impact your suppliers, or the things that are happening outside that you should know about, that are becoming increasingly important. So having access to this information becomes critical.
Well, and let me build on your point. How can you do ESG reporting? How can you do risk monitoring if you don't have clear, concise supplier data? Like that's
Well, you do it, but you do it a little bit of here and there.
In effect, you do it largely ineffectively.
That's right.
All right, well, let me bring Tim into the conversation from the company that I cannot pronounce.
Albemarle.
You have to keep reminding me. So as a CPO, you have a ton of experience doing transformations. Talk about your experience and really your challenges, because your challenges are the same as everybody else's challenges.
I sit in the chair and I listen to the theories and all the great ideas that are like, how do you actually go do that, and why do you go do that? How do you sell it to the business? I'm not a like, as most people, their path to procurement wasn't direct. When I came in, our company at the time was going through a large decentralized to more center-led transformation, and we're spending tens of millions of dollars in a new procurement and asset management platform, and we were trying to design, align business processes, apply them across 20 different mines, mills, chemical plants around the world, and so a ton of effort by the SI and by the software provider to really focus on getting the software right. Everybody standing on tables, banging and arguing for their way of what the process should be. And that took like 18 months of that. And then they looked at the schedule and said, oh, we got to get going, we got to get this out there. And all of these sites, it's like in the plan, it's like, well, that part that was data, so your plant, like billions of plant assets, of suppliers, of transactions, those, let them go, we'll just make the sites go do that. And when we show up to roll out this amazing thing we've created, it will just work. And so attempted to do that. And of course fell flat on our face. All of the ROI inefficiency was lost because data was left, and it's supplier data is a big deal, but material master, like all data that belonged to the site was left to the end.
Yep.
And then when they had to race to do it, they all did it differently, and it was a big mess. And then, so after a few years later, we went through a very large merger of equals. We had an opportunity to do it right. We chose a platform, 7 modules of a platform. We went really fast, and it was, okay, we'll focus on data early, but then we found out when we got into it, hey, this module doesn't talk to that module, doesn't talk to that module, doesn't talk to that module. So we thought we did it right. We involved the sites early, but we had to do it differently again and again and again.
So how did you do it differently? That's the question.
Okay, well so then we didn't. And then, and then I had another crack at it in another place.
A realist?
A realist. It was, and then we met, 100%. And then we met, and it's like, okay, we're starting from, this is another multi-billion-dollar organization. How do we do it again the right way? Yeah. And it was, look, the reality is, what we need to know about the supply, like in this case, the supplier data that we use again and again and again. How do we elevate that? What's the one source of truth for that? And so we started designing the foundation, and multiple foundations from which we knew we had to grow from. And that I had more success. I joined Albemarle. Albemarle is the world's largest, we do a number of things. One of the things, we're the world's largest lithium mining processing company. And we have to get ready for a change curve that is like this. Yep. And again, having an opportunity now and not only, like it's one thing to say, hey, build the foundation that can do that. But it's another thing to say our customers need to know so much more about who we're doing business with. How will you bring that to light instantly? How will you make our job as procurement professionals is enable the business to make the highest quality decisions repeatedly fast? And it always involves a supplier. How do I know in a world where your supplier record, I used to care about 6 attributes, and then I cared about 15 attributes, and now I care about 60 attributes to make that high quality decision, and it has to be made globally, it has to be made in an instant. How do I draw that in, how do I know how my supplier is behaving in China in a human rights sensitive area? How do I know that? How will I know that now? How will anybody have confidence that we're up to date on that? So that's my work. So we are designing, it's like find a partner, try to co-create what that foundation could be, and then figure out how we tie our systems into it, or create new dashboards or new ways of enabling our team to make those decisions.
Well, and I mean, my challenge is, isn't that procurement's job? Like what you just described, that's like our remit. Yeah. Why are we not doing that? Well, that was more rhetorical.
It is rhetorical. Look, we are burdened by legacy, by you talked earlier, and others have talked about skill gaps and reskilling necessary. We're burdened by, look, data, we all agree on the concept, but the how to do it is the challenge. Most people are not not out there, they're not coming, from what I can tell, you have to come to these things with an agenda and say, here's my gap. I can't do it on my own.
Right.
How do I go and partner with somebody to try to do it?
So let's talk about the partnership. You chose TealBook. How did you go through that process to choose them, and what did that look like?
Yeah, look, I got in a room with somebody who talked a good game, and after many arguments, we as you described earlier,
there's a theme here.
Oh, that was me.
As you described earlier,
Exactly.
Also with Elouise. Look, it was. So this vision matched with what I saw as a requirement, and there's no perfect in how to do it, and every situation is different. But I don't think anybody can argue the speed at which we have to make decisions. You can't have 53 attributes locked in somebody's email, in somebody's brain, in somebody else's brain over there, and they're different things. So it's like, how do we build a foundation, and how do we take that not only for suppliers but for other things to be able to just to draw that picture, that network picture, but with the right foundation. Met Steph, started the conversation, started to try things. I think there were some things we're very successful at. We went in Albemarle, we went with a diversity use case first, just to get the company and get IT, get our other stakeholders used to how to think about this.
You've got to tell the story about your team.
So we went from a diversity use case, which is the easiest one. I joined the organization about over a year ago. I got in, I became a steering committee member on a supplier diversity program, and they had been waiting for, this team that was building the supplier diversity program was waiting on the Center of Excellence to provide data about our diverse suppliers. And it was a request, and somebody said, Ariba can do that. Sorry. Ariba can do that.
No, please. Well, we can drag Ariba. I took them to task.
Ariba's a partner. Ariba's a partner, and they will admit this.
I'll do it.
Okay. Anyways, they've been waiting for 4 months, and I came in and I'm like, you're never going to get that. I said, what if I could help you in 2 weeks? And so brought TealBook in, they ran their thing, and we showed them that. So we got this sort of idea of TealBook in. And then we said, okay, now let's talk about other things we need to know about our supply base globally. So diversity is a good use case for us. It matters in Chile with Indigenous, it matters in Australia with Indigenous and local, it matters in the US differently, women-owned business, other diverse supply groups, it matters in Europe differently. So when we look at responsibility, that sort of thing, it's been a very good use case. But then when we start saying human rights here, child and forced labor here, modern slavery here, other health and safety things, and you add those attributes up that we need to know, and we present it to the team and say, we need to build this foundation. So I brought all the old Albemarle people, like very good people who had just done a big system thing but had never thought of things this way. And we put them in a room, with a virtual room with TealBook's folks, and said, here's the concept, how would you do this? And it was very contentious. It was high, I would say the tension in it was very difficult. Okay. And then I came out of a meeting very frustrated with how it was going. And then the next day I got this email, the team had collaborated, and they came back and you could just tell the light bulbs went on. And this is a picture of, okay, how do we take the data in, how do we actually build that foundation, and how do we apply through our systems something that we can use the TealBook app to do certain things around discovery. How do we, and this is just an example, everybody has to think of it your way, but how do we use SAP and the MDG functionality for what is that? What are the 6 attributes that matter in the system? How do we tie dashboards if we have a Microsoft Dynamics 365 dashboard that we've built for our direct team, differently for our indirect team, differently? They need different stuff at different times. And so they came up with this picture. It's like, hey, I have to pay small and medium-sized businesses in Australia in 20 days. New law. How do I know who they are? It's changing every day. Multiple times a day, that's changing. It's dynamic. How do we get on top of that? So there's a use case. Batch the database up, automatically consume it, make it smarter, and then we have access to it. Then we can report on it on the other end. So the team came back. They had this light bulb, and we co-created something we think we're going to execute on.
So I'm curious. So that's a very interesting, and that's like business, real world business. What's the ROI? Like what's the CEO comes to you? What's the ROI on this?
Yeah, look, for us, and I think everybody has to define. So for us, when we look at that investment, we say, supplier discovery, we have endemic sole sourcing and evergreen agreements so what is the benefit of us having more visibility of that supply base to add the resilience to be able to do that? It's, the return comes the opposite side of the question, which is what happens when you don't have that supplier there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we need to discover more suppliers and handle it that way. We're able to, when we do the math on that, it's multiples of the investment. When we get into the data foundation and high quality, fast decisions, we expect literally like 100x sort of return on data, which is, it's not an expensive so it's from a base of investment that isn't high. It's much more about our team's mentality to actually get in a room and figure out how to build a foundation and to think about the problem, which is 5 years from now, working back, if we don't do this, and we step next year with bad decisions and bad decisions and bad decisions, we are not meeting the needs of our business 5 years from now.
Right.
So look, I think in terms of pure numbers, I won't say that, but in terms of expectation of X of the investment, it is a substantial return.
And what I would say is yesterday I was talking to a CPO who spent 5 years building a data cloud for his team and having dashboard that would give them the insight. And he's done a good job. Like, it was speaking my language. I'm like, oh my God, I wish we had met 5 years ago. But he did it, and it was very, very challenging to build, very expensive, I'm assuming, to get to where he is. And he's just a fraction of the journey. And so we've built this. We've raised $72 million, and we've poured investment into building a very sophisticated data architecture with a pipeline of ingestion. Now we're building the business rules to control and have governance and be able to integrate our data into any workflow, any processes, any software. And so that procurement team doesn't have to do it. Because the value is not in collecting the data manually, right? Trying to piece the story together so that you can get back to your CEO whenever with information that they need. The value is be able to have the access to the information, get better insight, be able to take action, in a really fast way, ideally even before your CEO, CFO have to tell you.
Yeah, look, I think just on the ROI question, software decisions are often made, as you know, by somebody pitching, hey, if you do let us identify and assess your gap. Hey, your gap, we could help you save this. And everybody in the chain does the same thing, and you're double and triple and quadruple counting savings. Yes. And then they go do the project. And then you find out you didn't work on the data. So you spend tens of millions of dollars on this promise that can never come to fruition because you didn't work on the foundation first. So it's not only, so the return operationally is better decisions faster across those 60 attributes applied the right way. But it's also not losing, it's not getting fired because your implementation didn't go right as you promised.
Well, and I would also reverse it that we've often, like your CPO, and I have clients that same thing, they built it themselves. They took it as a giant buffet, and they got to eat it all in one sitting. And I think what you've done is reversed it and kind of done it.
Break it into parts. Yeah.
Break it into parts, and I think that's
And it's not about the mechanic anymore. It's about the use case, the workflow, the processes, the business outcome. So you're focusing on the right thing versus trying to become a data company. I'm telling you, it's very hard to build a data company.
Well, and also I think the technology has evolved even in the last 2 years, if not the last 5 years, or 5 and if not the last 2 years.
So much.
So that it's actually making this faster. And it's stuff that we never really have to see. Actually, you don't even have to, neither of you have to see it either. Your team has to do it.
That's right.
But it's abstracted now in a way that 5 years ago, we couldn't even conceptualize that.
Well, recently someone asked me, what's the proudest moment of building TealBook? And I was sitting in a room. We've raised $50 million last year. We put a lot of our capital investing 2.5 years worth of engineers and data engineers, some of the smartest people. We went and picked some people from SAP and Coupa to have expertise in our team so that they're not building this blindly. And I have the smartest people in a room talking about solving a problem that I saw 16 years ago. And they're like, 70% is above my head. But what the point was is just that, to have people that care so much about solving this problem. This is not a simple problem to solve, but we're so fortunate to have CPO partners that have invested with us, that are pushing us, that are guiding the requirements. And the use case, the situation, the maturity, the technology, the resources are all different, but the problem is the same.
Yeah.
It's the data problem, and where do you put that data so you could augment what you've already invested into? You don't have to change anything, but you can actually make it a lot better.
So your proudest moment wasn't the day that you saw that you were in the middle of my spider chart?
That was a really proud moment. It definitely helped. It was just before we raised Series A, and so that definitely helped us. So thank you very much. And it was, we didn't pay for this.
Nope,
Elouise put us in the middle.
Don't take any money. No, I think this is, and you mentioned this, Tim, meeting the business where they're at, and I would also add that it's moving at the speed of business, and you're building tools at the speed of business, and you're deploying tools at the speed of business, or data tools at the speed of business. And I think that's, as I've watched both of your journeys, and it's been really remarkable in that way.
It's hard to do.
Yeah.
And you have to have a mindset to say, we got to fail fast if we're going to try something or move on. It's very difficult to bring a team along into this. You have to tell and retell that story again and again. But I think if you have a positive use case to start, like diversity is an easy use case. There's a lot of people selling diversity now. It's gone well beyond that in terms of what does AI and machine learning offer us in terms of making sure those 60 attributes, and then our compliance. I love the statement yesterday. Our compliance group adds more attributes, and everybody's adding. Our customers are valuing, and their customers are paying for knowing these things about a supplier. How do you do that? And so the knowing that suppliers don't want to come into portals to do it. So a lot of the other folks are selling certain things. You got to really be careful about how, what is that technology roadmap that's going to get you there, get us there, to be able to, I have a vision. I create a lot of tension around this vision because I'm pretty sure I know what we need to do when a business, when our business has these needs. And so we really push on our partners, I think, pretty hard, and sometimes maybe unfairly. but we drive pretty hard.
Our team wants that.
Yeah, and you have to.
But I would say when you're talking to a software provider, understand the workflow, the requirements, and make decision based on that. If you're asking them, how do you get the data into the software? If they're telling you that the suppliers are going to come, they won't. And last year I was a judge at DPW. There's 30 companies. I'm sitting with CPOs. Every company that comes, I'm like, okay, I asked the question, how do you get the data in the software? Like, well, the suppliers are going to come. Yep. Second company, they're pitching their thing, like circular economy, marketplace, ESG, carbon emission. And then you're asking the same thing. And then by the third or fourth company, the CPOs start catching on. I was like, how do you get the data in the system? And now you can see the problem being exposed. So choose a technology for the requirements, for the workflow, for the processes that they're enabling the teams to do, but think about data differently. I think it's going to be.
Yeah, so I want to summarize, and I want to highlight a few things I've written down, because it's not the plumbing and the tools and all this. It's, Tim, you said it's the mentality, and you're talking 3 people here that love data, and I think that the mentality's there. And I mentioned this yesterday in the opening. yeah, as a CPO, you should be calling founders and talking to them. And here is a perfect example. And Tim is a CPO in disguise, in tech casual.
I got the memo.
Yeah, he got the memo. I didn't.
Change management.
Yeah, but he's out there walking the halls as are others, and I think that's important. And I also think it comes down to, if Steph talked about her people. If you look, I talk to startups all day, every day, and the most talented people by a long shot, top to bottom, work at TealBook. I can't tell you, and you can look at our text messages back and forth. I'll talk to a new employee there because for some reason, and I'll text Steph and say, oh my God, I love so-and-so. They are the best employees.
Well, when you solve a big problem, and someone asked me last night, how do you track people? And I think the fact that we can also track information on small, diverse, sustainable businesses, and we can surface that information to large organization, it transformed the world. It actually makes an impact. It brings a lot more equity. And so for that reason, and I think that we're solving a really big problem, and being a woman founder I think it is an asset when you're attracting talent as well. So we're very fortunate.
That's great. So I'll just leave you with this thought that, we often say the customer is always right, the most important person in the equation. Well, now there's a question about, is the employee the most important person in the equation in business? And I would say perhaps the supplier is the most important in this. And I'll leave you with that thought as we go. So thank you, Tim. Thank you, Steph. Thank you for attending. And it was great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.